Well, South Africa's G20 Sherpa, Zane Dangor, has outlined Pretoria's priorities for its presidency of the grouping at the United Nations General Assembly. The United States Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, previously criticizing the theme solidarity, equality and sustainability. Let's speak now to the Director General at Dirco, Zane Dangor, who was at the UN in his capacity as the personal representative of the head of state in preparation for the November summit. Good evening to you, DG, my time, and it's good afternoon to you there. How were you received by the member states as you drove the message home about South Africa's theme for the G20?
Good afternoon, my side. Good evening for you. We were very well received. This is apparently the fifth time that the Sherpa presents to the General Assembly following a resolution to the fact that the G20 and other informal groupings will address the General Assembly and outline the priorities. According to the permanent representatives, this was perhaps the best attended of all these meetings over the last 5 years. And we were well received. The delegations from all parts of the world welcomed South Africa's themes, endorsed its priorities, and also gave us recommendations on how to tackle certain things such as climate change and dealing with critical minerals. So we were really very well received. This was confirmed in the many meetings that took place after this General Assembly address yesterday.
Yeah, as we prefaced the conversation, DG, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, the U.S. Secretary of State, previously criticized the theme. Did they stick to the same position, or did you sense a shift?
Look, the U.S. was present in the General Assembly, the representative. Of course, they don't have a PR at the UN at this stage. The nominated permanent representative will most likely only join in about a couple of weeks' time. The US did not take the floor to make any comments, but the body of permanent representatives representing their countries in the General Assembly all spoke and all endorsed the South African presidency. So there was no comments from any negative comments on our themes from any states who took the floor.
Yeah. Well, DG, I think you'll understand my line of questioning, particularly as it regards the United States, because of the temperature right now between these two countries. My understanding is that perhaps part of your trip there is to read the temperature on the ground. What is your assessment as to the realities on the ground and in particular as it relates to South Africa? What is this hostility towards our country, particularly from the US?
So, I think, remember, at the moment we're busy with the UN processes. Over the next couple of days, we'll be going to Washington, D.C., where we'll be having an in-person Troika meeting, which will include South Africa, Brazil, and the US. We'll have a better sense then as to how to approach the management of the particular Troika for our presidency. So, there's no real sense in New York about hostilities, because at the moment, when you engage in the UN, you're engaging with member states. And as I've said, that at this stage, what we're picking up is just enormous support for South Africa. But of course, you pick up in the ether and through the kind of correspondence on social media that there's still the kinds of concerns that the US may have with South Africa. We'll find ways of addressing these over the next couple of weeks. But the important meeting for us is just the in-person Sherpa meeting that will be Troika meeting that we'll be having in DC on Friday.
Do you expect that you will have a better audience? In fact, in all probability, this might be the first real audience that you will likely have with the US. Am I getting ahead of myself here?
No, we've had an online meeting of the Troika. So the Sherpa from the US, the Sherpa from Brazil, Brazil is the past president, we the president this year, and the US will be the president of the G20 next year. We've had an online meeting, and it was very professional, very cordial. And we then agreed at that meeting, given the fact that I'll be in New York to do the annual address to the General Assembly, that we'll follow that up with an in-person Sherpa meeting. So we're looking forward to that meeting, and we're looking forward to working with the Sherpa to the extent that we can in terms of our own priorities, but we'll find ways of seeing to what extent we can manage this troika so that we do have a successful outcome. So it's a bit, seeing that we haven't had the discussion yet, I can't comment on what the outcomes would be.
Yeah. Before I let go of the conversation related to the US DG, and you'll forgive me for this, there is news coming in tonight that there is an ambassador designate, the US ambassador designate to South Africa, Brent Bozell III. Are you aware of this? And if you do we know who this individual is?
Look, I think we're all getting the news at the same time. So we've just seen that he's the nominee. Of course, he'll have to go through the various approval processes in the US. At this stage, I don't have enough information to have a sense of who he is and what he stands for. All we're getting from, is the sense that this is the person, and the attendant social media then comes with that. I don't want to comment on, reflections on any person based on social media posting. So let's get a sense of, once the official processes in the US is completed, then we'll be able to engage with the nominee more formally.
Yeah. What are the processes from the South African point of view once an ambassador designate is put forward by a country? What are those processes from our side?
So once he gets approved by the US, they'll apply for what is called AGRIMA, which is just a fancy Latin term for approval from our side. It's very rare that we don't give AGRIMA. It's very rare, and it has to be, one of those instances where a nominee has, behaved in a way that would make their stint as an ambassador very difficult for us to deny AGRIMA. So that's, so the processes is that various government departments, including Dirco, and the vetting processes that takes place, biosecurity services takes place, and based on the information we gather, the AGRIMA is given.
Okay. Did you tell me, have you met with the embassy staff in the US, and were you able to get a temperature of the morale? It's been a very tense period.
So I'll be going to Washington, D.C. on Thursday. When we finish with all the meetings here in New York, we will then meet with the staff and engage with them. We'll get a sense of what the temperature is, what the key issues are. We'll get a sense of who we need to talk to, when we need to talk to them. So we're definitely going to be meeting with the staff on Friday morning before the Sherpa meeting.
Yeah.
And the Troika meeting. Yeah.
As we wind down the conversation, November is fast approaching, and this tenuous relationship between the US and South Africa, it does give this feeling that the United States may not be in South Africa, even in that official handover process. I mean, so far, there hasn't been any of the senior people attending at least the first round of meetings. Are you confident of a successful G20 nonetheless, whether or not it includes the US?
Look, I think we will still have a successful G20 meeting. The G20 meetings doesn't always have the kinds of consensus that one assumes that it has. There's a lot of negotiations that takes place before you have a leaders summit. We've had 2 leaders declarations of the last 2 years after hard negotiations in previous years in Indonesia. And we did not have agreed declarations because of the geopolitical issues. We've managed to get declarations in both Brazil and in India. We still think that we'll have a successful summit this year. And we have had the Sherpa, for example, engaging in our meetings in the working groups. So the US is participating. Of course, what we will be needing to do is to engage with them to ensure that we don't lose the ambitions that we put out for our own presidency. You know, there's very important meetings taking place this year, which includes the COP in Brazil, and there's also the Financing for Development meeting taking place in Spain. These are important meetings of the UN, and we don't want to have a weak G20 outcome, because that influences what then gets how it influences, for example, the declarations both at COP and at the Financing for Development. So we will make sure that we keep the ambition and find a modality to work around those who may not be in agreement with our theme and our priorities.
Yeah, well, I can't let you go now without teasing out what, in South Africa's view, would be characterized as a weak G20 outcomes. I mean, that's a very interesting statement.
So one of the issues that, if you look at the criticisms of our theme, it is basically aligned with the criticisms that the current administration has on what it calls DEI. And that includes, for example, disagreements on the SDGs, Agenda 2030. It also looks at, the human rights of women in a negative way. These are the kind of issues from a South African presidency that we cannot, that will almost be red line issues for us given our own constitutional framework, but also just building on what has been achieved in India and Brazil around these important issues. This is essentially the normative framework around human rights, and we cannot allow it to be diluted under our presidency. So we will try to keep that in place, and as well as the important discussions on financing for the climate change agenda.
Yeah.
That too is important. The G20 is an informal grouping. It doesn't make any binding decisions, but as I said, because it brings together some of the biggest economies and some of the most powerful states in the world, what is agreed to at the G20 does have an impact on how these issues are taken up in other fora.
Zane Dangor, thank you very much for your time. And we wish you success in your scheduled meetings in the United States. You are staying there for a good few days, is it?
Yes, we're completing a few more meetings here at the UN, and then we move over to Washington, D.C. for one day.
All right. Zane Dangor, the International Relations Director General, also there, though, in his capacity as the G20 Sherpa.